welcome back to Not Too Late. We are recording um, at a very unprecedented moment. In the last couple of weeks, global energy markets have been thrown in a chaos. Um, Attacks on critical LNG, oil, infrastructure in the Middle East have disrupted the global supply chain right now. And it's sending shocks, like biggest shockwaves, which I have not seen in my life, from everything from my country, Pakistan, to in America. Gas prices are going up, and it's costing food, fertilizer, and everything in between. Today I'm joined with Sam. Sam Ruben is an entrepreneur, a systems thinker, and a co-founder of HyWatts. I learned about Sam's startup recently, and I was chatting with him the other day, and it was so much fun. And then I want to keep that fun conversation in this whole podcast, where we are going to talk about how this geopolitical shock is going to probably permanently change the power we live in, and especially in terms of energy sector, and why centralized grids are failing us, and how distributed systems, specifically combining with solar and other clean tech with hydrogen, might be the technology that can have a bigger impact in the future, especially after when things get over from this situation in Middle East. So welcome, Sam.
Thanks
Can
for
you
having me,
please,
Zeshan.
thank you so much for your time. Can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and what are you doing these days?
Yeah.
What kind of, how do you deal with the chaos around us?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in there. I'll start by introducing myself. Growing up, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I thought I was going to go into politics and be working for a senator or something. And then, so I'd studied political science and economics for undergrad at Vassar College. Ended up doing some work at the Red Cross after Katrina in New Orleans, and finally ended out here in California in 2006, where my first job was as a beer buyer, but that quickly got boring. And so I ended up working for a global grassroots interfaith peace building organization called United Religions Initiative, which working with organizations of all sizes, everything from small businesses to municipal districts to breweries, wineries, large nonprofits, private schools, public schools, really kind of the whole gamut, and helping them identify ways to find savings to their bottom line through reductions in waste, water, energy, transportation, and other sustainability metrics. But doing that very much focused on the business case. And then, oh, and by the way, you've got this incredible story you can tell because you're doing all the introductions. And was doing that and serving as a teaching assistant for the operations class at Presidio when one of our former classmates posted on one of our Facebook pages that at the time she was at Indiegogo, that she was working with some founders in the 3D printing space who were looking for someone to help with regulatory compliance, market research, and sustainability. And for me, my MBA capstone, me and my team actually built this business plan to take clean plastic waste from hospitals and convert it into 3D printer filament. Great idea, except for all that plastic is polypropylene. And well, there really isn't much of a polypropylene filament, but it was still an incredible experience, especially because I've been in love with 3D printing ever since I realized that Star Trek replicators are just atomic level additive manufacturing with energy manipulation. So in my mind, you can 3D print anything as long as you have the right inputs and the right way to put them together. So I connected with these founders that my friend had posted about, and they shared this vision.
Sam, I want you to give me two levels. One is
Mm-hmm.
macro and one is micro, right? Through a systems thinking approach, I want you to like explain me that why hydrogen and what is this thing that you're showing and how is this different with batteries and what is it? Tell me in a more simplistic way so the audience also can understand it.
Yeah, so what you see on the screen is HyWatts' first product, what we call our power plant in a box. And what it does is combines on-site renewable energy generation, usually solar, because solar is cheap and you can put it on almost anything, but we can work with wind, we can work with geothermal, whatever makes sense for the project. And then we combine it with our proprietary hybrid energy storage, in which we combine a normal battery, because they're really good for short duration and peak response, with hydrogen for that longer duration, seasonal, multi-day, steady state. That's critical for really providing, allowing renewables to be a base load despite their nature. And it works by taking the solar generation and using that as the primary generation technology. So what you see here during the day, sun shining, energy, the solar panels are providing energy directly to the homes. When you have excess production from the solar, such as during the summer months, or times when the middle of the day, other times when the houses aren't at their peak capacity, that excess energy is converted on site into hydrogen via electrolysis. So just using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Then we store those hydrogen molecules at low pressure, just 200 bar, using type 1 canisters that have been optimized for both costs and safety for decades in heavy industry. And then when needed, we convert it back into electricity, such as during the rainy season, during the winter months, other times when the solar panels aren't able to provide all the necessary energy. And so by combining all three of those, the on-site renewable generation, the short-term and peak response battery storage, and then that long-duration hydrogen storage, we're able to allow renewables to be that 24/7, 365 energy solution for residential communities, data centers, EV charging stations, other critical infrastructure that's currently limited by a lack of capacity in the grid.
So what, in simple terms, what I'm understanding is that solar has batteries installed in it, or any kind of power generation. Batteries have a very small duration, from probably 3 days or maybe more. But
No. Batteries are good for hours, not days. Like even if you're like the average home consumes roughly 30 kilowatt hours of energy per day. Generally, batteries that folks are installing on individual homes are in your 10 to 15 kilowatt hour range. So they may get you through the night if you're lucky. And that's really one of the challenges, is that they're also, like most home solar systems, when they have batteries, they're sized based on average demand and average generation. The problem is that your generation is very different in the winter months versus the summer months. And batteries aren't good for holding that energy from one season to the next. They're good for hours or even overnight, but beyond that, they get very, very expensive. And then you have things like self-discharge and other issues. And so because of the way we're designing these solar systems, and because of the cost of batteries, once they get past that 4 to 8 hour mark, we really aren't seeing solar systems that can allow that solar to be the full energy source. And that's where that hydrogen component and that longer duration energy storage is so critical, because it allows for addressing that difference in production from winter to summer in a way that you just can't do cost effectively with batteries.
I have a question related to hydrogen. Whenever I think about hydrogen, I'm a little scared.
Yeah, there's a small thing called the Hindenburg that is very deeply embedded in the global consciousness. But as one of our technical advisors says, thank God the Hindenburg was hydrogen. Because the fact is, no one died from burning. People died from things falling on them or from falling. If it had been another flammable gas, say, I don't know, methane, natural gas, something we have running through houses, things like, or that we have in giant tanks in propane houses, it would have been so much worse, because those are heavy gases that pool and collect. Whereas hydrogen is the lightest element in the world. It just dissipates immediately. The second if there's a leak, it automatically goes into the atmosphere. Oftentimes with batteries or other flammable gases, when they're burning, you have this black toxic smoke like we're seeing over Tehran. When hydrogen burns, you get water vapor. So it's non-toxic in that regard. It also burns at a lower temperature, so there's less risk of a secondary fire. And it requires higher levels of oxygen to become explosive. I mean, hydrogen is used every single day in incredibly high pressure in industry across the world. And you all never hear of any safety issues or any explosions or anything. Do they happen? Sure. It's a flammable gas. It still is a flammable gas. But if you take common sense precautions and follow the regulations that are in place, it's incredibly safe.
So tell me a little bit about the hydrogen market right now in America, and how is this technology combining with other clean tech can change the whole systems?
Yeah, so there's been a big push, particularly I live in California, and California has been a national leader in trying to create hydrogen infrastructure. And frankly, it's been a mixed bag. There's been a lot of hype a few times, and that's kind of fizzled. And part of the problem there is that a lot of the focus so far has been on creating the supply, but there haven't been the off-takers. We're seeing more and more use cases in aviation, because one of the electricity is amazing, but batteries are not useful when it comes to planes because batteries weigh a lot. And batteries also don't reduce weight as you fly. That's one of the great things about liquid fuel. It's like as you use it, it goes away and you're no longer carrying that weight. But with batteries, you're the same weight at the beginning, so you have to. It impacts how far you can go in your storage. But if you say compressed hydrogen instead, even whether it's a fuel cell or combustion, you're able to replicate that reduction in weight as you travel, and you're also able to capture incredible power that can meet the needs of whether jet fuel or electric planes using fuel cells. So a lot of opportunities there. It's also heavily used in various industrial processes. It's a critical piece of semiconductor chip technology. That's actually one of the places it's used extensively at high pressures. So it's something we already see a lot of, but it's about how do we really leverage it as that next phase of the energy transition, because we've largely moved away from coal, and that's been both a regulatory decision, but even more so a market decision. Coal's too expensive; it can't compete with solar and with these other technologies. And fossil fuels, we're starting to move away from oil because of cost structures. We're starting to see, and that's why natural gas has been getting so much. So becoming more popular. Most of the cost of the energy is not for the energy itself. Most of the cost of the energy is to move that energy across long transmission lines. And so with our technology, what we can do is we can deploy this where it's needed and create fully off-grid communities that aren't reliant on the broader grid. Or we can do connected communities that are incredibly resilient and have their own energy security in the face of rising costs, in the face of an uncertain grid. And particularly more and more like what we're seeing in the modern world of cyber warfare. If you look at, say, what happened in Ukraine, Russia shut their grid down. That was one of the first things they did. And so if the U.S. and that very likely would be if the U.S. were to enter into more of a formal war, and it still could happen even with Iran, knowing what we know about their cyber capabilities. So we could see attacks on the U.S. grid that knock out whole swaths of our country. And if you don't have this distributed resource, that can be incredibly dangerous. And because the reality is, like, for as comfortable as our lives are, we're probably a week from chaos, if not more, if not less. And we saw a little bit of that with the supply chains during the lockdowns and what happened when all of a sudden the things we're used to being able to just go to the corners and get weren't available. We're about to see shocks in the system right now with the war in Iran, because as you noted, like, it's oil and gas. Yes. Oil and gas drive the cost of everything. They drive the cost of plastics. They drive the cost of food because you've got diesel trucks moving everything everywhere. You've got diesel tractors. You also have issues with the Strait of Hormuz being one of the number one places in the world where ammonia travels through, and ammonia being a critical fertilizer. And this particularly right now being a critical time for fertilizing in places like India and Pakistan and Asia. You're going to see plastics in the U.S. start to get a lot more expensive. Because yes, in the U.S., we don't necessarily use a lot of oil from Iran. China does, though. Japan does. A lot of Asian countries. And what we're also seeing is, I think it was Total, the French energy company, just today was announcing that 30 to 40% of refinery capacity in the Middle East is destroyed. Not just offline, destroyed. And then additional capacity taken offline through emergency shutdowns. Those ones that were shut down, probably 6 months to a year to bring back online. Those ones that were destroyed, years to bring back online.
I was actually reading an article on CNBC, and I remember last time we spoke that now after this war or the policy changes in the last 1 year, moving away from clean tech, now bringing us back to clean, which is which is such a metaphor. I don't know. Can you tell me more about it and tell me the way how it will shape the things in future?
And that's part of the problem
Yeah.
too, is that a lot of this is caused by how we're approaching um, AI and like how we're this idea of machine learning and just throwing compute at LLMs. But I think we're starting to see that shift in terms of the tech side, because they're realizing that the energy costs and everything make it so that if you're building your model on LLMs based on a ton of compute, you're not making your money back. There's not a viable profit pathway. And so we're starting to see shifts, like NVIDIA's coming up with new architectures that can allow their chips to run a lot more efficiently by shifting how they do some of the inference and stuff. You're seeing models that are moving towards get more and more efficiency of compute rather than just brute force compute. And so that's going to change the equation a little bit on the energy demand side. But that's one of the things that China is doing really, really well right now. Is China is rolling out data centers left and right because they're looking at them as part of energy infrastructure, and they're doing so as they bring on significant new solar and other renewables. And so the only way that here in the US we can actually bring all those data centers online that we've been talking about is by thinking about them as energy, as part of the energy system, and really moving them forward in that way, in combination with on-site generation, in combination with more utility scale renewables and storage. Because when you've got a data center that's using tens or hundreds of megawatts, you're talking about a city. You're talking about
Yeah.
a big city. Like we're like
Yeah.
like when we're talking about these data centers, yeah, we're not just talking like in terms of energy, we're literally talking about bringing entire cities online. And I don't think that's how people are thinking about it, but that's what we're talking about in terms of energy. And so we need to think about it in that way.
What I'm saying is for an audience that how do we explain the problem right now? And obviously, let's say, for example, Texas is one of the places which is shooting up in terms of data centers and like what
So
we
part
want
of
to
that is
about.
because it's really easy to deploy new energy.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that's one of those, like the deregulated market in Texas around energy is part of why they're able to do the deregulated market in Texas is also why they all lost power during an ice storm
Yes.
a couple of years ago, and the fact that their grid's completely disconnected from the rest of the U.S. grid. So for those out there who have no concept about the America's grid, it is, I don't want to say a shit show, messy. We don't actually have a grid. We've got like 7 grids that are all interconnected except for Texas, which is its own little thing because it doesn't like playing with others. I think there's one emergency, but that's it. And so you've got these independent system operators like California, CAISO here in California Independent System Operator. In Texas, it's ERCOT, the Energy Resource Commission of Texas or something, I forget. But these are the kind of the organizations that oversee their portion of the grid. And these grids often are privately owned. Like where I live in California, most of our transmission lines are privately held by Pacific Gas and Electric, which is the utility here in the north. They're a investor-owned utility, so they provide dividends. And so one of the reasons we've been having issues in California is that with the wildfires and everything, part of why they've been so devastating, and frankly why they've started in many cases, is because of PG and other investor-owned utilities failing, making decisions around whether to use their money for maintenance and upkeep of the grid or pay out dividends. That's a whole other conversation. I won't get into that one too much, but it's that lack of maintenance on the grid that's caused a lot of these wildfires in California, and it's why PG&E has gone bankrupt something like 3 times in the last 10 years because of all the damages owed to people, billions and billions and billions of dollars because of these incredibly destructive wildfires that were started by old equipment moving in the wind, basically, and sparking. And so the way it is in the U.S. is these big power plants that it's kind of a centralized hub and spoke system. It's one way, where you've got a centralized big power plant that's providing energy, like hundreds of megawatts or gigawatts of energy, that's then moving across these transmission lines, sometimes thousands of miles, but often less, to get to where it needs to be, to your house, to this light bulb right here. And that's great, except for it's really expensive to build out new infrastructure. It can be really expensive to build out new high transmission lines. And there's a lot of critical supply chains within that, like for really large electrical transformers and inverters and all this equipment that sometimes, like one of the reasons we've been seeing delays in new interconnections is one, both because of there not being enough capacity in the grid, but also years long backlogs of some of these critical transformers and other components of the grid. And so it's a very complex thing that hasn't really been upgraded much in the last 50 years. And I don't want, and for those out there working in the industry, yes, I know you're all working hard. I'm not trying to, but it's really, to have the grid we need today, we need to start investing and upgrading it 20 years ago is, I think, maybe the best way. And we didn't. And so the simple fact is, if we want to have all this cool new stuff that uses electricity, like more efficient hot water heaters, AC, cars, data centers, all this fun stuff, we need better ways of providing that electricity. And that's where distributed production and on-site generation are critical, because that adds so much strength and resilience to the broader grid. Because it means that instead of that data center pulling energy that might otherwise be going to these homes, it's able to offset that with what it's generating on site, perhaps all of it. And then it also becomes an incredible tool for the broader grid, because one of the most important things the grid does as a grid, and where that interconnection becomes really important, is moving electrons where they're needed, when they're needed. And so one of the things, like, and this is where storage becomes critical with renewables, is like in California, because of all the solar, there's a thing called the duck curve. And basically it refers to the fact that during the middle of the day, sometimes energy becomes negative. The grid actually has to pay people to take it because there's so much energy, solar energy coming in during the middle of the day. But then you get spikes in the cost during the night when that solar goes away. And so it's part of it's, how do we make sure those are where they need to be? And storage gives those electrons somewhere to go and then saves them for when you need them, when there's too little of it. And that's what the hydrogen does. But it does that instead of between, say, morning and night, it does that, say, between July and December, and holds them for that period. And for that, that long duration is critical along with that shorter duration. But the distributed part means that we are more secure, because a failure over there doesn't no longer means I lose my energy. And that's not just important for business, but this is important for people's lives. I mean, think about hospitals. They often have generators, but those generators can only run for so long. Think about stores. Think about people's food in their fridges. All these things that electricity is critical for. Heat during the summer. I mean,
Yes.
as we're seeing hotter and hotter summers, AC is no longer a nice to have. AC is literally the difference between life and death for some people in some places.
Yes. That's a very good analogy, because I come from Pakistan and I have seen growing up no electricity for like 8 to 10 hours. And now, in the last 3 years, when they made a solar policy, things have been completely changed. All the rooftops in country has been installed with solar panels, especially after 2022 floods, because it was the most devastating floods.
Right.
I wanted to ask more, Sam, about HyWatts. Where have you installed the project yet? What are the numbers? Because numbers run America, probably. The most important thing.
And that's something where we believe deeply in at HyWatts, is you have to be able to make the business case.
Yes.
Like the fact, like, I actually don't talk about decarbonization anymore. I talk about resilience and security, because the decarbonization part is nice and it's definitely a positive, but it doesn't move the needle at the end of the day. What moves the needle is cost per kilowatt hour of electricity. And so what we've done is last year we deployed a MVP system, which was a mobile trailer-based system. So it's like a 60-foot trailer running a couple level 2 chargers with roof and side-mounted solar, and then our storage technology inside with the hydrogen conversion unit, the battery inverter, things like that, and did over 1,000, almost 1,500 hours of level 2 charging, and got incredible amount of data. We did a lot of that here in the Bay. Also took it over the Rockies to Denver to the NREL Industry Growth Forum, did some charging there, SoCal, NorCal, all over. And that gave us some really, really good data, which shows that depending on the scale, we can deliver electricity anywhere from 9 to 25 cents per kilowatt, which in some places that's going to be expensive. In places like California, that's dirt cheap. Here we're paying 35 to 45 cents per kilowatt hour, and it's only going to keep going. So we have our first 2 commercial deployments coming up this year. One is being backed by a grant from the Sacramento Air Quality Management District, which oversees pollution for the entirety of Sacramento County. And so we're deploying a DC fast charging station there, which is going to be a part of their vision for 52 mobility hubs across their service area. And they're really excited about what we're doing because we don't have to wait for the grid to be upgraded in places. So like, for example, the one we're doing in Sacramento, we're getting about 300 kilowatts from SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And then we're deploying 300 kilowatts of solar. So it's kind of going to be 50-50, and that's going to be able to do fast charging for 30 plus cars per day. The other project that we're breaking ground on this year is for a 172 household residential community in Kerman, California, outside of Fresno, here in the Central Valley. And that's going to be really exciting. 118 single family homes, 54 apartments, center, amenities. And so for that one, rooftop solar on every building, we're deploying additional covered parking with solar canopies to ensure that we have all the generation necessary for the community. And then we're using our storage technology to allow that to be the 24/7 supply. We'll still have, so each house is going to have an allotment. What we're doing is we're selling the energy to the HOA, and then the HOA is providing energy as a part of its services. And one of the things that it's really attractive to homeowners is that we're guaranteeing them a price for the next 20 years at a price that's already lower than what they're paying the utility now. And the utility has already announced increases. So that's one of the things the developers are able to release it. And then for this phase, we're going to have the utility on site as a backup. So when each house hits its allotment, they flip over to the grid, and then at midnight flip back. But for the goal is for the next 9 phases to be fully off grid. And this is really a vision for resilient communities and can allow infrastructure to move forward at a pace it just simply can't currently because there's just not enough energy. And to do so in a way that's going to future-proof them against instability and against rising costs. And do so in a way that doesn't generate fumes. Like if you're talking about, say, a rural community that's running on diesel. And we've had some great, we're currently actually exploring the Australian market. We're still very, very early in that. But one of the things that has us really excited about the opportunity there is, take, for example, the Northern Territory, which is like that big state that runs from like the center of the country in Alice Springs all the way to the tropics in the north and Darwin. They have 54 off-grid communities across the territory. Those are all currently running on diesel generators. Many of those communities are inaccessible by wheeled vehicles 6 months of the year due to flooding. So only accessible by boat or by plane during those times. And so your communities are dealing with giant diesel generators in the middle of their communities with fumes, with noise. And many of these communities are Aboriginal communities and First Nations. And so the other critical piece is the Northern Territory government subsidizes energy for the entire territory. If you're in the territory, you pay 35 cents per kilowatt hour Australian, no matter what time of the year, where you are. And so that for more developed places, that means the state's subsidizing 20 to 25 cents per kilowatt. For those communities where your cost of the diesel can be 70 cents or more, and frankly, it's going to only go up now with everything in Iran and everything, they're subsidizing more than half of that. And so there's a really exciting opportunity to use our solution to provide clean, reliable, resilient energy to those communities that can reduce their energy costs while also eliminating the need of the state to subsidize it. And so it's situations like that where it really becomes a win-win-win, where everyone benefits. And then it's also a situation where the decarbonization itself, it's awesome. It can provide funding, but that's just a secondary. It's really about that low cost, reliable energy that people need. Because all of a sudden, when you do that, people don't have to leave their small towns to find economic opportunity, particularly if you combine it with, say, satellite internet connections. Or all of a sudden you can create economic development in places without having to wait for spending millions of dollars in running power lines there.
Sam, tell me, when you were talking about a lot of these communities which are distributed in terms of power in Australia and maybe other places.
Oh, all over the world. I mean, across Southeast Asia, we're seeing right now. I mean, if you've been watching the news, the Philippines just went to a 4-day work week because to reduce the need to save people a day of gas. You've had other places that are subsidizing it. You've got places like Indonesia that are holding off, but that's because they wanted to wait for everyone to get back from Eid before they implement things, because when they tend to mess with the fuel, they get protests. And so one of the things that we're going to be seeing, I think, in these places because these are countries and areas where mobility scooters are a big part, and motorcycles and two wheels are a big part of mobility. Guess where the majority of what the majority of electric vehicles in the world are? Oh, hey, two-wheeled motorbikes and scooters.
Yes.
So there's incredible opportunity in these places to be able to take infrastructure like ours and deploy it where we're deploying distributed generation with storage. And all of a sudden, you can switch from a fossil fuel economy to an electric economy. You can start saving your consumers money by allowing them to buy electric scooters that they can charge at a relatively low cost, or even charge at home if they put their own little solar up there. And so that shift, I think, is going to be accelerated because we're going to see a lot of social upheaval in these places with those that are so dependent on imported fuel, because that goes directly to the cost of living. And these are places that already have a history of unrest when fuel costs go up. And so I think we're going to see a big shift across Southeast Asia, and that's somewhere. And so island nations and areas with limited or unstable grids is an incredible opportunity there. Even places in the US like tribal lands and elsewhere, there's opportunities to support that. And by doing so, it's not just creating resilience and security and economic benefits, it's also allowing for a leapfrog and to move in terms of technology from, instead of following the same path that the US and China have, where we go through coal, then oil, it can allow for leapfrogging of technologies and moving to the next phase. And that opens up the possibility for whole new ways of being and whole new solutions. Because something I'm a big believer in, and this is something I know you were going to ask a question about, but I'm beating it to it. Sorry. Is that as we move toward, like, as a global society, we really need to be looking to those communities that are thriving, not just surviving, but thriving in cases, in places like the slums of Mumbai or Kibera in Nigeria, or the ghettos of Johannesburg or favelas of Rio, like these places where people are creating community, creating ways of living, and creating opportunities for themselves. We as a global society have so much to learn from people who are able to thrive in scarcity in those ways and who are able to make do with less. Humanity and society as we know it is probably going to go the way of the dodo, except there's a little thing called human ingenuity, our unique ability as a species to come up with totally new ways of doing things that change everything and do so really, really quickly. Problem is, we usually do it by mistake. So if we did it with intentionality, think about what we could do. And it's that unique ability of our species. And it's not just people who've gone through formal, people who have those lived experiences that inspire them to see different ways, that inspire them to new possibilities, to having the imagination to look beyond into a better tomorrow. And that's what gives me hope. And part of that's also about figuring out how do we make the right thing the easy thing. This is something that we've talked about as well. And for me, that's really, we saw during the lockdowns, and we're likely going to see it currently, aside from the massive amount of smoke over the Middle East. We can make the changes we need to buy humanity time. We saw lockdowns, for the first time in years, we were on the right path during the lockdowns in terms of emissions.
Yeah.
But the problem is, it requires a level of sacrifice and that we don't have leadership on the global level to inspire, because it does require change. It requires people doing things differently. And so when I say we need to make the right choice, easy choice, it's about going upstream. So that's why one of the reasons why with Mighty Buildings, I focus on the built environment, because so much of our energy goes into the built environment, and there's opportunities for the built environment to be a climate solution. Same thing with energy. So much of our emissions are tied to energy and how we generate that. So we can figure that out and do so in a way that makes the business case. Because at the end of the day, it's still, you have to make the business case. But the cool thing is, climate tech makes the business case. Sustainable business is good business. It makes you more robust and resilient during times of upheaval. And so by making that case, we can make that right choice, easy choice. We can focus on zero emission energy, not because it's zero emission. That's a huge positive, but because it allows us to do the things we want on a day-to-day basis in a way that we can't with current technology and solutions.
Last question, and then we wrap this up. I mean, this is the last question.
Do we have to? This is fun.
10 years from now, let's say, where do you see yourself and HyWatts? Where do you think, where are you going to be as a
Yeah.
company and as a person as well? Your personal journey.
I think, I mean, in my vision and my dream, I would love to see HyWatts as a network of companies around the world providing distributed, like whether perhaps it's a new model of utility, or perhaps it's as a technology provider for companies within these countries, but being a part of unlocking low cost, reliable, distributed energy everywhere, and really giving people, empowering people to make the choices that they want to, not necessarily choices being forced into choices that they have to, that may not be the best choice for them simply because that's the energy cost or the availability of electricity, but being really freeing humanity to do those things that forward us as a species by providing energy. Because then we're getting to a point where energy should be a human right, and energy
Yes.
determines what you're able to do and what technologies you're able to take advantage of. And so that's for, I think, on the HyWatt side. And then for me personally, if I get to be a part of that, man, I've done something. Because that's yeah. Like, my hope is that in 10 years, the world's such that I still get to go outside and I still get to see natural beauty. I get to take care of my people. And I get to say at the end of it all that the world is at least a little bit better from I haven't been a part of it.
Yeah. Last thing, what's your favorite vegetable?
Ooh, it's a tough one. Growing up, it was weirdly Brussels sprouts. I don't think it is Brussels sprouts anymore. Jicama's really, but I don't eat a lot of it. Cucumbers are also really good. Zucchini, artichokes. Ooh.
So you don't have one.
No, I really don't. Like, I love,
Ah,
like, I really don't have a favorite anything, because so much of it depends on my mood. Like, what I like might be my favorite right now, probably won't be in a week. And then will be again the next day. Like, it's, yeah, I like a lot of
amazing.
things, and what's yeah, it changes by the day. It's just the underlying value, pretty consistent.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam.